And now, part two, people add value experience with Fran C. That's true. Um, so so after the journey, I'm curious about two things, but one I want to ask about the where because I don't want to like help me with the gap here. Where does the tiny home part fit in?
Yeah.
Is that I'm assuming that's after the walk?
Yeah. So during the walk, well, kind of post is like, wow, I can live out of a 4 cubic foot stroller. Like I don't really need that much. And I don't remember if maybe I was watching something and YouTube, while I was in the tent or at a hotel, and I was like, oh, the tiny houses are cool. And I'm in my 20s. I was like, I set my mind to something and I just do it. And I genuinely like just things that are not on the fringe, but my current obsession is Japanese key vans, and maybe one day I'll have one of those. But back then it was tiny houses, and it was on the upslope. People just started doing them, and I think maybe I saw one or two along the way. But I was like, all right, I don't need to live in a house. If I have space, I tend to fill it. Because when I went back, I think I moved back in with my parents, then I moved in with my brother, and all of a sudden I just have this space and I'd have crap and I just fill it, and I didn't use it, and it was a wasted space. So I'm like, there has to be a better way to live that is more efficient and just easier, easier to maintain, cost less, and then I can do the things I want to do.
Right.
I don't have to like sign a lease. All right, I'm going to be gone this many days. I'm wasting this money. It's like, all right, build the tiny house, pay it off. The one, we can get into it, but wasn't super mobile. Had the ability to move, but that wasn't really the point. So that's realizing that I didn't need that much.
So I guess how do you bridge the gap from the skill set of building like blocks, right? Concrete blocks and forklift to actually building a home? Like, even though it's small in scale, but how did those skill sets, did they translate, or did you have to learn something else, have some friends?
So I went to college and I have a degree in fine art, and I had a friend that we'd share studio space. And one day she looks at me and she's like, "You're not really an artist." And I was like, "Oh, that kind of hurts." 4 years
Punch
into
me
an
in the
art
face.
degree. She's like, "You're a thing maker." I was like, "Yeah, I like that. I am a thing maker. I like, everybody thinks art. They think, painting, drawing, sculpting. And I liked installation art. I liked redefining a space either with color or form. I saw my walk, and that taught me how to think differently. And I saw kind of walking as this thing, creating this experience. And I've always been somewhat handy. And I was like, I want to build a tiny house. Like, it makes sense. I can build them. That was part of the allure of it, was I get to learn how to do this. And so we're just kind of the same way the walk happened. Research, pulled the trigger on buying a trailer. And once again, my parents were supportive of it. And yeah, we just started by buying a trailer.
Was it parked out like in the fields, like in your property? Is that where you started?
Yes, it was parked in one of my brother's barns.
Okay.
And I just went through Tumbleweed Tiny Houses. They had literally a website of how to build a tiny house. I just followed that.
Wow.
Yeah, and the first thing I did was get insulation. They built them specifically for tiny houses. So the bed is lowered, and then the framing is on top, so you could put insulation. Where the bed's not on top, and you have to build something. So my brother and I, we bought it, drove out to Pennsylvania, and picked it up in Amish country, which was really cool. And it was a terrifying experience to tow a trailer when you've never towed a trailer. You just paid thousands of dollars for this thing, and it's bouncing over the road.
Yes.
Yeah.
I may or may not. So in the military, right, we have a couple of things, and I drove around and towed some stuff. But the first time towing was when we bought our RV, which was 43.5 foot long.
Huge.
And so driving that with a dually all the way from Florida to Vegas and then back again to Florida was
worst tension headache you've ever had in your life.
Oh my goodness. I mean, luckily the dually handled that pretty well, but yeah, I mean, that's literally your whole house.
Yeah.
Like you said, right? Like that's your whole house back there. And then when you fill it up, it gets even more like, cause now your stuff's in it. So empty, you're like, okay. I mean, again, you're still stressing out cause all that money, and that's where you're going to live. Yeah. So yeah, I feel you on that one. So because we talked about it earlier, you were on, was it Tiny Home Nation? Is that
Tiny House Nation?
Tiny House Nation. How did that come about?
So we were building it. I was loving the experience. I was on Facebook, and the side ad came up. Like, are you thinking about a tiny house? Are you building a tiny house? we're interested in your story, just an ad. So I sent an email, and I got an email back. Because I sent them pictures too of where I'm at in the process. And it was a television show that was going to be on, essentially it's called FYE. And it was just interview after interview. They kind of see how serious you are. What have you been doing? So they would do like a Skype interview with me. Then they would say, hey, can you get 5 friends? You got to be out of the room. We're going to interview them. We're going to interview your family. We're going to interview all together. So it's like 5 or 6.
Oh my goodness.
Video interviews. And then while I was meeting this, things just go like this. It's crazy how connected I was in Ohio, and this is the time when I met my wife. I got a phone call. They're like, we want you on the show. I was like, you serious? Like, yeah, we want you on the show. And it's great. Let's do this. What do we need to do? So they sent out producers weeks beforehand, and they sat you down, and you feel like you're being wooed, because I think they say what you want to hear. Because I said, I want to learn how to build these things. I want to be hands-on. I want to be part of it. Yeah, absolutely. Not a problem. That's part of the show. And that was like, couldn't be further from the truth. Wonderful experience. So happy we did it. So they came out.
How far along were you? When
I had a subfloor.
Oh,
I had a subfloor.
That's it. So you didn't go, framed the walls, nothing yet.
I planned 6 to 8 months to build this thing because it was me, my buddy Brian, my brother, anybody who wanted to help in the meantime. And I planned 6 to 8 months, and they came out in 10 days and built a tiny house. And the experience was, like I said.
Wait, hold on.
Yeah.
Hold on. So you built 6 to 8 months was your plan. Mm-hmm. They come out to start filming.
Yeah.
And you had to do it in 10 days?
I didn't touch that house. And that was so disappointing because they like the backstory,
They used your backstory, and then they're like, hey, Fred, get your team together. Let's go ahead.
So at one point, they brought in an empty trailer, okay? And they filmed it in my father's stone yard. So my brothers were in it, my father was in it.
Oh, that's cool.
They brought in an empty trailer with like a goose, a plank at the end, the one that go down so you can drive things up.
Sure.
So this is the trailer. You're the camera people. I'm looking at this. 20 yards behind you is my 3/4 built tiny house. And they're like, pretend this is your trailer and that you don't know what you're doing. They literally tell me that. Like, just say you bought this and you're in over your head and you didn't realize there was a slant in the trailer. As like my tiny house, I'm looking at it. I'm not kidding.
Oh,
and I was like, okay,
gosh. That is
this
hilarious.
is making so much sense about how things are done. They end up not using that. But what was really interesting, they take a picture of you every day in your clothes, and then you film. The next day they come, hey, we actually went back and when we were doing, some editing, that didn't work. So can you put this outfit on? Because we got to refilm that.
It's funny. Do you ever watch like The Voice with, all those folks, and they have through the whole season. Well, and I know they cut, so they'll film like hours upon hours, and then they cut, and they'll make that a couple of episodes. But I know it's sort of like, do you remember Steve Jobs? And he always had the black turtleneck. So that's why I wear this shirt. I don't have like one. I have like 15 of these things.
Yeah.
With kid puke. Anyway, so it's like it helps out. But like that's I bet their wardrobe, they probably have 10 to 15 of the same exact everything from head to toe.
100%.
So and because of that, right? Editing. And it's so funny and I know you like movies like I do, sort of. But like when you go back and look, I always look at clocks.
Yeah.
Because clocks are like the telltale sign. Like if someone's a really good editor, they'll go back because you can look at wristwatches, watch, whatever, and or the clocks on the wall.
Yeah.
And you'll go back and then you can see, because it'll be like blah, blah, blah. They go to the other person, then they go back to that person, and you look back at the clock and it'll be like hours off. Like not minute, like hours off. You're like, okay, horrible editing.
I always look at glasses with ice and straws. Because that straws, it's going left and right.
Well, it's funny because I didn't know this, but if you ever look now, they'll always fill them up the exact same level.
Yeah.
So they'll have 5 different people, 5 different glasses, especially on the really corny TV shows that are out there, but they're all the same level and they never change.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, supposedly an hour or two has passed and this person's like dehydrated now, or like, or they're drunk and they haven't drank any alcohol, you know, like what's going on here? So there's movie magic.
And it makes me think of like the genius of Napoleon Dynamite when he's putting cheese on his nachos and it's just like goes like this. It's so obvious. Like they're just making fun of it. But so yeah, it was, I'm happy we did it. They built me a house I could never build. I was supposed to be the pilot episode of the series. That was the intention. They didn't. I love the guy that was the host, Pete. He's an Australian guy, and he would call me afterwards after the show was done. Hey, how you doing? How are things? How's your family? He would sit with us hours after filming, and the crew was wonderful. The whole thing was positive. There was really nothing negative about it. There was I felt some manipulation, which I didn't appreciate, and I kind of called him out on it. I said, this doesn't feel real. Like you're asking me to say I didn't think about this. Right. Like I spent 6 months, 5 months walking across the country and 6 months researching. And now you're going to portray me as someone who didn't think about where am I going to put my golf clubs?
Yeah.
Like that's not important to me. Mm-hmm. And they're like, rain came. That's what happened. It was like 4 days of rain. So they had to stop filming. They flew back to LA, did some editing. They came back and like, you know what? It doesn't look authentic. It doesn't look real. So let's refilm some of this stuff. And you want to live in a tiny house. You're passionate about it. You got started. And you just want help finishing it. You want to live in time. Okay, that's a great storyline because that's what people do. Like, yep. I'm not stupid enough to think I can live in 148 square feet overnight. Right. I thought about this.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's important, right? And so that's the same thing I try to do, with this, the people I've had experiences. I want to be authentic. Like I don't want, and a lot of folks, and they'll talk about scripting and they read scripts, and which I think is fantastic, and I think that's really good. And if I'll do like a one-on-one, which are just me talking, I'll try to do a script, but a lot of the times the flow of the conversation and just like, oh, that reminds me of this, but if you're so strict in format, unfortunately you don't have that opportunity, and people catch that. Like people will sniff that out in 2 seconds, like, or you're not being authentic or whatever else, right? So like I think that was really good on their part. To go back and
it made the experience after that conversation better. It made the episode better. If you want to watch it, apparently it's on Hulu right now, even though it was 9 years ago, 10 years ago.
How's the hair in that? How's the...
They wouldn't let me pull it back. They wanted this like scraggly looking. Oh. Yeah, so I had long hair. I did have long hair. What is that? It was post dread, but then I grew it out again.
What's the word I'm looking for? That like new age type, like
I
not
went
quite hippie, but
it definitely turned into a man bun.
I love man buns. Yeah. Because remember my little horsetail, if you will. Yeah. So okay, cool, man. So you did the tiny home thing. Now you touched on a little bit. You met the wife. Yeah. Around this time period.
Yeah.
So I think this is an imperative transition into the
little backwards. In that same time that I was meeting her, I also was able to take a quick hiatus because I was working at the church at that time. So I came back from my walk. I had a job I hated at a residential facility. I worked at the church 2 years as a assistant director, and then you call them youth pastor, youth minister. I like director. It just sounds nicer. So 3 years there. So that going from that second to third year, I took a quick hiatus and I got a job at Trek America, the one I didn't get and really didn't pursue at 24. Right. Thank God, because at 28, I was much more suited for this. I would take people from LA to New York over the span of 3 weeks in a 15-passenger van, and we would camp out or stay in hotels. But I got the same weekend, I got the call that I was going to be on Tiny House Nation and that I got that job. And then I met my wife, and it's just like in the same weekend. So it was wonderful.
Same
and that
weekend,
like
2 days.
Yeah. And that job was another one where it was just problem solving, decision making. Your mom, dad, you're the driver, you're the ambassador, you're the.
So I mean, did you get to tell like stories while you did that a little bit, or about your journey? I'm assuming that helped out a little bit.
Oh, absolutely. I mean these people, there were no Americans on these trips. They're all international clientele. So they're very interested in the American lifestyle. And someone
was there any kind of language barrier or
very rarely. Most of them, I think, signing up and paying thousands of dollars for these trips, they know that it helps to speak English. I did have a couple Japanese passengers that had fluency enough to enjoy it and have a conversation. The hardest people to understand were the Scottish people. Oh my gosh.
But what do you mean they speak it?
Yeah. But it was great. But yeah, that was a great experience. Another just problem solving. Everything I feel like I've done is problem solving.
How long did you do that for?
6 months.
6 months.
Yeah. And I had 4 trips. I loved it. I'm glad I did it. I probably wouldn't do it again. It was the most rewarding, most stressful job I've ever had, because you're driving 6 hours a day, 4 times a week. You're going to cities, having to kind of pretend like you've been there before when you've never been there before, and lead a group of people.
Here's the famous building, 3049.
And then you're like, looking at your cheat sheet. But you were provided with a plethora of information to make that part easier. I remember a girl, though, in Vegas lost her passport and credit card, and she was from Denmark. So I had to find the Danish embassy.
Oh, wow.
And fortunately, it was like an hour and a half away. So I set my guys up in Vegas. They had plenty to do. Her and I drove up. She met the ambassador, or whatever it is. I drop her off, and they tell you don't go in parking garages with these vans. And I pull in, and the gate shuts, and I go through the first part of it, and I hear,
oh no!
And you're on the hook for these vans, and it's just scraping the top just enough. I'm like, oh my gosh, what do I do? And I was like, tires. So I went and I let the air out of the tires enough. It reminded me of my out of order days in the bathroom. I let the air out of the tires enough to drop it, half an inch to get me out of the garage.
That's, it's funny. Just, yeah. I mean, that's awesome, because I always see those videos. Oh my gosh, there's somebody driving like a bread truck or something in those garages, and they hit the top. And then they try to accelerate, and it's just ripping the top of that thing off. And then it's grabbing air ducts that are in there. I mean, and sprinkler systems, and just
bad to worse.
But who would have thought, just like they do in off-roading, right? For more surface area, but to drop the actual height. So, hey, that's a good lessons learned, right? For people.
That's what I mean. It was like that stuff gave me confidence that, okay, I can figure things out, and while dropping somebody off at the Danish embassy.
Oh my gosh.
But so that job, it helped me develop skills. It helped me work under pressure, under stress. A little bit of fake it till you make it, some parts. And,
sure.
Just responsibility. You're responsible for 15 people. And
so you went, now how, so the big gap here, this is the talk of the transition. Go ahead.
Yeah. So it was, working at the church, little, 6-month hiatus from the church to work, Trek America, came back for the church for a year. And then that's kind of when the tiny house was right between Walk and Trek America. That was all in the span. We filmed the show right before I left for Trek America, so I was able to live in it for a little bit, but then I had to leave it for 6 months. Did that job, came back. So that's when I met Kimberly in that whole little span of Trek America, because she, on my last trip, flew down and surprised me in Miami. We'd been dating 3-4 months at that point. We were driving back. So it was a great way to get to know, your spouse.
Nothing better.
And I remember driving this van out of nowhere. So how many kids do you want? And I'm like, I don't know, 2, 3. It's like, I want 7. And
almost going off the road.
Yeah.
Holy. Yeah. Wow.
But so then, we had dated for a year and a half. She, knew about the tiny house because we met. I got that phone call that weekend, and we were able to talk about it. So then I lived in the tiny house for a year and a half up in Massachusetts. So her and I had been dating for a year and a half, long distance. She was getting a master's at Franciscan University, which is in Steubenville, Ohio, which is where her and I met when I brought kids out to a ministry called Dirty Vagabond. She was a volunteer and working for the high school ministry. And when you're working with high schoolers and you're a single guy, all the girls try and get you to, do you see her? She's cute. Do you see her? She's cute. Yes. So they went, do you know our youth minister? And Kimberly's like, no, where is she? And I was like, hi. And it was something, I knew it was different when, this is the age of texting, but I said, can I have your number? I would like to call you. It just was kind of just this intuitive thing to say. And I think it caught her off guard because she's 6 years younger than me, 7 years younger than me. And I met at 28. So she was 22. So she was in the prime of texting as communication. Right. So I think she appreciated that.
Yeah.
And we talked and would visit, dated for a year and a half. And that was I moved down here with the tiny house in 2015.
So what drove, that's the question.
I hired somebody.
No. Sorry, not drove
okay, the tiny house. My bad.
What drove the move to Florida?
I think I in youth ministry for us, there's a sacrament called confirmation, and we do that in 11th grade. A lot of churches do it in 8th grade. It's different times. So I had gone through the process with kids in 9th, 10th, and 11th, and it just felt like a great point to, I'm ready for the next chapter of my life being Kimberly. If I'm going to commit to this, I think I should move and be closer to her. So it was a good, I'm okay with leaving, working at the church. In looking back on it now, my friend Brian had passed away tragically.
Oh, sorry.
So best friend, and that happened while I was doing Truck America. So that was a really jarring experience. And so I at the time, I probably didn't recognize that it was like, okay, I just want to be away from this. Mm-hmm. And it was something new. It was a tiny house that was going to be by the beach. Like, how cool is that?
So I missed. So is Kimberly from here?
She grew up here. She went to collegiate.
Oh, I totally.
Yeah. Her dad was 26 years Air Force.
Oh,
she was born in Homestead, then came up here, went through school here, went to college for a little bit, and then went up to Franciscan. She went to collegiate. So she got her associates at 20. And then, no, sorry. How does that work? Yeah, she got her associates and then her bachelor's at like 20. Okay, let me rewind. You get your associates at 18 at the collegiate. She got her bachelor's at 20, her master's at 22.
Holy cow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So she's very, very smart.
Yeah.
And she's like, do you want to move?
No judgment there, Fran.
She's like, yeah, no, I know. I'm the good looking one. It's fine. We all have to have our chance.
That's awesome.
But she's like, so, and the funny part, she's like, do you want to move to Tallahassee? I'm like, absolutely not. I'm like, I'll move to Niceville, because she was working in Tallahassee, because I'd visited her and we came down here for Thanksgiving. And the wonderful family that she has, she's half Filipino, made me, white people Thanksgiving. So there was a ham there. And I was like, I'll bring the tiny house to Niceville. I can't move to Tallahassee. That's just like a stone's throw from the beach. Like, why are we going to live in Florida? If it,
Okay.
I visited, I like Niceville.
I understand that.
Okay. She's like, I'll leave this job anyway, and I'll go. She ended up being a school counselor at St. Mary's Catholic Middle School.
Gotcha.
So then I hired somebody to tow it down and stayed on her relative's property out in Villa Tasso. And that's how it kind of got down there.
How long was that?
Year and a half I lived in it here.
Because you sold it, right? Because I know you brought it up to the brewery at some point.
I brought it up to just get it out of there and bring it up here. And then I had it brought back, and it's still sitting on my brother's property. But as we speak, we're deciding as a family. I don't see that house as mine. I see that as my family's house. Yeah. We're deciding whether or not to sell it. Wow. Because right now it's just, it's sad to see it sit there and not be used.
So out of a interesting, just, wet noodle on the wall. Like, there's all these people that are doing experiences now, right? There's the Airbnb, but there's all these people that like will go work at a ranch for so long or whatever else. Is there anything that people like maybe could do, either like you tow it to Chris's ranch or whatever, and people could come do that and live in that for a while, or even the family business? Like, hey, do you want to learn about some masonry supply? It's sort of like
I think that's asking a lot of other people if I'm not up there. If it were down here and it'd be like, I talked to Tim and Jason and Brian, like, hey, what if we did an Airbnb and you get a brewery tour and you can stay here? But we don't own that land, so it was a liability that we couldn't take on.
I understand that.
And it just makes me sad. It's a family friend that wants to buy it. Okay. And he's like, you can use it whenever you want. Like, I'm gonna fix it up, and so it's like I said, it's a family decision. It's sad to just see it sit there. Oh yeah. And I think we associate it with such a positive experience with the show.
Right.
That to see it leave our hands. I mean, I'm going to tell them, hey, I want first right of refusal. If you decide to sell it, we'll buy it back. No Makes problem.
Sentimental value, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I had dreams of making it the world's tiniest brewery, because right now I think the world's smallest brewery is like 155 square feet and the tiny house is 148. That would be ideal.
There's nothing to say you couldn't do that. Just be like, hey, bro, I'm going to come out for a week, knock this out, and then now you have the check mark.
There you go.
That's it.
I just want a Guinness. That's a bucket list. I want a Guinness Book of World Record. I don't care what it is.
There's all kind of weird stuff out there.
There is.
I've seen some. I mean, like one guy was on one of the TV shows, just like smashing coconuts. I'm like, just where do people?
Anything that doesn't cause me physical pain.
Yeah,
I'm fine.
That's pretty funny. So now, okay, so you're in Niceville.
Yep.
With Kimberly.
Yep.
And how did you get approached about, or how did you meet, Tim and Jason and get approached to start working in Third Planet Brewery?
I was literally driving down with my mother following the tiny house, and Kimberly called, and I don't know, I was looking into breweries, I think anyway. like Grayton and stuff like that, just because I needed a job when I got down here. And once again, I don't believe in coincidence. It's just God incidents,
Sure.
The right people, right place, right time. She's like, my family friends that I grew up with in Niceville are opening a little brewery. And Tim wants to know, because she grew up, with Tim. Tim wants to know if you would want to work there. I was like, yeah, of course I want to work at a brewery. Like,
that's a brewery.
Why
would you not?
What 28, 29-year-old wouldn't want to work at a brewery?
Sure.
So I show up with my toolbox, and I'm like, I'm ready to work. And it's an old 1955 Sears Roebuck house. It's, they're redoing it. They've been working on it for, 4 or 5 months at this point, and just doing everything themselves. And once again, cement comes back and haunts me, because the first job was digging fence post holes for like the first week and a half.
So quick backstory. So Tim and Jason were both, I think, home brewers, right?
Yeah.
And that's how they sort of got into that.
And they met up in the Pentagon when they were both stationed up there.
Yep. And so they came down. And so then at some point, was it Tim or Jason, or that's just the conversation like, man, your beer's good. Hey, man, your beer's good. Let's go ahead and see if we can find a small place to start.
And I think Tim was more homebrewing with Jason.
I gotcha.
But Tim, and Jason, I think, was from here, got stationed here. I don't know how his affiliation with Niceville, but Tim just saw the need in Niceville. There was nothing like it. Destin's developing, and you got to cross the bridge to go get craft beer.
All right.
And I think when they were up in Washington, they entered a couple festivals, and Jason's beer won some Cherry Blossom Festival for the Hefeweizen. And they said, well, if we ever find ourselves both back in Niceville, let's start something. And with Jason's beer knowledge and Tim's just commitment to the community, it was a perfect storm. And they talked to Dan Pettis, who owned 120 Bistro. I think now it's the Heritage Room. It worked out that they needed that space, and it is. You can ask for like more character.
What's the square footage in that thing? I mean, it's got what, 300 maybe?
Maybe.
I mean,
I think the occupancy is probably like 15.
Depending if you're asking the fire marshal or not.
Yeah, exactly. Like 3 people. It's like half of it's gone with the employees. But yeah, so we worked on that. I got here in October. I probably started helping them maybe 2 weeks in.
What year was that?
October? 2015.
2015.
Yeah, because we opened in 2016, June 2016, I believe. And the first night we opened, we sold like $500 worth of beer, and we all looked at each other like, this works. Somebody paid for something that we made.
So in that process of helping build it, did you start learning the brewery process as well?
Yeah.
So you were integrated in the
so I asked
making of the
Jason,
beer.
just teach me what you need me to do. So at the time I had 3 jobs. I worked at a golf course, I worked at a nonprofit, and I worked for Tim and Jason. And then once we started getting going, I slowly dropped the other jobs, because Tim's like, I want you here full time. We need, this is working. We need somebody to be here. And Brian Detweiler, who's now our head brewer, also part owner, he was a home brewer that would come in, and his beer is just insane. It's so good at a homebrew scale. It was great. And I think he walked into our brewery and was like, I can make this better.
Wow.
And he came in and revamped the whole process. And I knew what I was doing just from like a repetition standpoint. Brian knows what he's doing from like a scientific standpoint.
Because he was a teacher, right?
He was a teacher at Choctaw.
Science, was that science
history teacher?
I thought at least he was a science or biology.
No,
I didn't know.
I think he's kind of what do they call it? Autodidact, where you dive into subject matter. Like when he goes home, I think he researches beer. When he's at work, he's researching beer. He just loves to perfect that product. So what I saw very similar in my dad, I saw in Tim and Sue and Jason when it came to customer service. Like, we're here for, it's not us against them. Like, it's not, business owner, customer.
Right.
I'm right. You're here to be in my establishment. It was very much from the beginning, Niceville's establishment. We were just blessed enough to be at the wheel. And that carried on because it created unity. I mean, just coming down here, seeing the unity around the high school is very jarring for me, because New England, especially when it comes to sports, New England, it's pro sports. High school sports is kind of there, but nothing to the degree that it is down here, and how many people rally around.
Yeah, the South, depending on how you define the South, south of Mason-Dixon or whatever, like the South, because I grew up in Texas, and like high school football, college football, giant. Like, I mean, then there's that whole, line or divide right where I grew up. It was either, do you like the Aggies or do you like the Longhorns, right?
Yeah.
Huge separation there. I mean, you couldn't be both. You couldn't have it.
Yeah.
And then of course,
state.
my dad's from PA. So he's like, Eagles fan, not a Cowboys, and like the Phillies and just Penn State. And so like literally just the one little fish in the giant lake of Texas that likes the Eagles. So, and then, I've transitioned, and I while I did grow up under the influence of the Cowboys and everything, I am now an Eagles, have been an Eagles fan for a while, Penn State. Anyways, so it is shocking here. Like we are, and by the way, we're pumping out like collegiate, like level sports kids
and
that
World
are,
Series softball teams.
I mean, holy cow.
Yeah,
like it's
insane.
It's pretty crazy. So, so the community, right? So it was built around the community for the community. So is that, I'm assuming that's what made you, so what did you say, 2015? So what are we at?
We opened in 16.
8 years.
Yeah.
8 years.
Yeah.
That's a long time.
Yeah, we're, no, it's 7. So 16. So it was established 2015, opened 2016. So we're at 7 years.
So,
but the business 8 years. Yeah.
At what point did you start becoming involved in like the hiring process of getting folks?
So that when I went full time, Brian, I think, was right behind me, if not at the same time. He went full time as brewer. So it was the Launchpad location. Tim and Sue Books kind of would serve. They were the face. But Brian and I, Monday we would clean kegs. Tuesday we would brew. Wednesday we'd do some maintenance and cleaning. And then Thursday, Friday, Saturday we were open. We were only open, 3 days a week, I think, when we first started. Mm-hmm. So we were kind of the ones doing all that. And Tim, Sue, and Jason filling in the cracks so we could just, be open. But it was their baby. We were kind of at their hands. They had a vision for it, and we were just trying to help facilitate that. I think a year and a half in, Tim was like, this is really working. And I think I have an idea. I think I want to, go bigger. And Jason wanted to go bigger.
So with that, I guess, so you're saying at the Launchpad, then the hiring was pretty much just, who you knew at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. So Tim and Jason, like Jason's wife would come in and help. Kristen would help. Brian Detweiler's wife. We hired, a couple people, but it was only 3 days. It really wasn't too much. When we started expanding the hours, then we started to bring people in.
So when you say expanding the hours, was that for the 3 days that you're open?
Yeah, because when we started, it was just like Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Then we went to, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. We always said we'd never be open Sunday. And I'd have to go back and kind of look at a Google Calendar if we ever opened up on Monday or Tuesdays in the beginning, because I really don't think we did. So that was more of a collective when it came to the hiring.
So it took approximately a year and a half before you almost basically outgrew the space of what is. And I remember going, especially during the parades, not the Christmas parade. I forgot what parade what is the parade? There's the Christmas parade.
Yeah.
Where like everybody, because everyone's on that street right there. And so you'd go in, have a beverage, hanging
Tim
out,
and Sue make breakfast burritos for everybody.
Phenomenal.
And
little buffet thing going on.
You had an excuse to have a beer at like 8:30 in the morning.
There's an excuse to have a beer at 8:30 in the morning. Sorry, I'm pulling up like a template here. So
yeah, you're fine.
Just to go through that, make sure I'm not missing anything, because I feel like this is an imperative part of the conversation. So, which is funny, we're actually doing pretty good here. So you move. So how did the strategy go? Were you part of the strategy going, okay, we're outgrowing this area here, as far as like square feet and just being able to pump out the necessary amount of beer for people to drink?
Yeah.
How did y'all finally decide and go, okay, we need somewhere, and then you have to approach like, hey, we need this amount of square footage. Yeah. And then, that whole, in my head, right, from a strategic business standpoint, is we're going to increase percentage, probably 15 to 20% due to the trend of microbrewery right now. So we can't just buy for what we need in like the next year or two. We need like the next 5 to 10 years or whatever.
Yeah,
Were you part of that like thinking process, or?
So not thinking back on it, no, because I think there's so much to do. It was great to have the trust of Tim, Sue, and Jason and Rachel to run that while they were getting all the nuts and bolts of the new place. Because with Pat Burns, who owns the land and the building, we lease it from him. They were really in charge of that. And it was nice because then they left us to kind of run the tap room. And yeah, we'd go and we'd visit and we'd see the structure. And the structure actually was there like 20 years ago as a nursery. You know, it's a greenhouse. Then it was picked up and turned into Nick's Seafood. I do remember going Nick's Barbecue. Nick's Barbecue. That's right.
But it was Cold Creek.
Cold Creek. Thank you. Cold Creek Barbecue, and seeing the space and being like, okay, it's ugly, you know, inside. So we'll definitely have to gut it. And then the process of them lifting a building, putting it on a trailer and driving it down the road. So they dug out a hole, and where we're at now, put a foundation. They backed this house up, this building, and just dropped it on this foundation. So there's actually a crawl space underneath the building. I remember seeing those things, the big milestone stuff, and going in. I also remember helping with the design process of where things are going to go. So I do remember all of that.
So did you? I'm trying to remember. Because when it was getting built, the actual brewery side, so that was more of the tap room,
Yeah.
And so the actual brewery side with, and it's so funny because I don't even know now how many. Like you started off with,
we start with 4 15-barrel fermenters,
and now what do you have?
We have 4 15s, 3 30s, 2 7s, and 2 2s, and then we're about to get, I think, a 30-barrel bright tank, which is just a way to clean beer up. And I think that's it. We might grab another one. So during that transition, I don't think, this might be skipping ahead a little bit. We were producing 16 barrels a month at the old location. So a barrel of beer is 31 gallons. So we were producing almost 500 gallons, roughly 500 gallons a month. I think yesterday they brewed 900 gallons, yesterday.
So well, before we get into that, because I want to talk about the canning, but so now that it's growing, because I do want to tag onto this. So how did you approach the hiring now? Because now you're sort of running out of the family and friends, right? You're starting to go in that scope. And so, and I think this is important for lessons learned, especially in our area. And even like one of my questions I hopefully have time for is the COVID question. But so how did you approach the hiring process at that point now that you've grown out of that? Yeah.
And that, when we decided, talking with Tim and Jason, I think they understood the scope of what we were about to do. And I don't know, it was probably their idea that like, we want you to be part owners of the new place of Third Planet 2. And it would be, the mothership, and that's the launch pad. And with that came more responsibility. And, they said, we want you to be in charge of hiring and firing. Fortunately, with that transition, we did know people. We knew regulars. We knew, I knew you. Marissa, Will Sanders, Marissa, Amanda, I mean, all these people that had been coming in for a couple of years. And we did some interviews in the launch pad previous to opening the mothership. So once we opened, we had a staff ready to go. I took this test once, and it tells you your strengths. And one of them is, so my top one is connectedness, adaptability, and then futuristic thinking are the top 3. And the interview process, I try and keep it informal, because you're in an informal environment, for lack of a better term. You're not in a desk, office environment.
Right. Yeah.
I want to know, can you hold a conversation with me?
Right.
Can you talk about beer a little bit? We can always teach beer knowledge, but I can't teach you how to be behind the bar and have a conversation. That has to come naturally, and it has to be, appropriate. And you have to, I want to see if I'm going to, I hate the term boss, but if I'm going to be the one that is leading you day to day, how do you have that conversation with me? Because if it's crude and you think you're being funny, I'm like, all right.
Right.
If you're doing that with me,
right.
And the culture that we've created is not that. It is not a bar culture. It's brewery taproom culture.
So did you ever? Because at one point, I don't know if it's true now, but at one point it was very touted because like everybody had a degree, at least a bachelor's degree, that worked there. Was that part of the process, or did it just come about that way organically?
Just came about. So the thing is, it's most people's second job,
right?
And we're in an area that highly educated area, and people just want to do something different for Friday, Saturday night. And there were times when we could do that. Now I love the people that can work 4 to 5 days a week, and trying to transition over now to get people more career oriented rather than just a secondary job.
Right.
So that was never all right, what's your degree in?
Right.
I mean, I have a degree in art. How does that qualify me?
But that's important, because like what you said actually rings true from a larger business standpoint is, well, there's sometimes, depending on what you're applying for, a necessity of a hard skill, right? Or technical skill. When you're in a customer service industry and or like can bridge the gap from a technical standpoint, you have to have those soft skills. Like you can't teach soft skills as much as you can technical side.
Yeah.
So if that comes natural, especially in that instance when there's a little bit of education there, because people come in and they're like, well, I sort of like this. And you're like, okay, how do I transition that knowledge and go, well, I think these three, right. The whole, like, we want a top name domestic beer. And then you're like, okay, well, here's the three that are closest to that. Yeah. But have you ever thought about this? Or do you like sweet? Or do you want and so I think that's a huge thing to be able to have and hold those kind of conversations. And then, like you said, you can build that technical knowledge. I mean, it takes a little bit of effort there, but I think the people, like you said, that you wanted and ended up hiring had that passion and want to do that anyways.
And I think there's Anthony Bourdain said, those are the intangibles working in service industry. He could meet somebody and know if they worked in the service industry, which was interesting. And now, having been in that industry, I want to make that a priority for my son, because I think it's really important to serve. I think it's important to humble yourself, and I've always say, the customer is not always right, but they should always be happy.
Right.
So there's finding a way around a situation with the customer, and your pride doesn't get in the way. It's you're there. They're doing you a favor by patronizing your establishment. So let's make that experience as best as possible.
So as the part-time job goes, does that play a role? Because one of my questions I always like to ask is like, how you build the morale and culture, and then have, your folks, the personnel that work there, like, sustained, right? Like, so how do you keep somebody working there for a longer period of time? But I'm hearing that maybe because it's part-time, that's not 100%, maybe applicable, because
it's helpful.
Yeah.
It's helpful. And we're flexible, probably to a fault, with, I don't mind if you need if you can't work, but as long as you get it covered, that's fine with me. That's you not being a no-call, no-show. That's you being responsible. You saw your schedule, you can't work it, you find somebody. So I think it's, if somebody has to do that for 2-3 weeks, that's fine. I'm not frustrated with them that they're not working. As long as, they maintain that skill level when they come back, that they will address that when that comes. But maintaining, I also believe that,
because you've had some, I'm trying to remember now how many people have been there since. So Rob's been in and out for a long time.
Brian, Rob the brewer?
Yeah, Rob.
Big Rob? Yeah. Oh, he's been there all along.
Foundation.
Yeah.
In some aspect. That's what I was saying. He's been there forever.
He did some serving and then went back to full-time brewing.
Right. And then yourself, Brian, I'm trying to remember.
David Day.
Yep.
Heather Jolson.
Yep.
Scotty Frisbee.
Is he still in and out?
Yeah.
I haven't seen him in a while.
Yeah.
Because he owns a restaurant.
Yeah, he owns Cafe Organic.
Yeah. Wow. But then go ahead.
I call it, we're transitioning to our third family. That's what I've seen it. So, the first family when it comes to the mothership is, the Charles Wilson, my buddy. Well, we had this whole family that was there for a year and a half. Then slowly some people PCS and have to leave for another job. They get a better opportunity that is full-time, benefits that whole line. And now we're on our second family. And now I lost 4 people because they PCS, they moved. So now we're bringing new people in, and I feel like it's the third family.
Yeah.
And I find people, we went up, my wife and I went up to Casbah in Crestview and had coffee, and the gentleman behind the bar or behind the register knew all the product, was super friendly, had never met us. We probably asked questions he's heard 1,000 times, answered him like it was the first. And we had Third Planet stuff on. He's like, oh, I love your beer. And there was like the interview for me.
Yeah.
And I'm like, if you ever want to work, let me know. If you ever find yourself, wanting a job or get into that industry. And he had great references, but it was those just informal, once again, intangibles. Yeah. Because we've also had people that we interviewed and they interview great. And then they get in and it's like, okay, you're good. But I just like seeing people in their natural habitat, because that's what you're going to get after they get the honeymoon phase of working at a brewery's over.
Sure. So, I've always been curious. So with the hiring, being a part-time employee, if you will, you guys, for the morale and culture, not only just being informal and friendly and just, being around people the whole time, but you guys hold a couple of events during the year. What are those events that you have going on during the year?
So usually what we've been doing this year, one is quarterly staff meetings, and those are on Sunday mornings. And what happens is people hang out afterwards too. So we want to be around each other.
By the way, one of those things I want to say, one of the only places I've ever seen where people work and then they're back there a large amount of time.
Yes.
Like a large amount of time. Like you have the hangout corner where people that work there just go hang out after the fact.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty cool.
But we do Friendsgiving. So we close down on a Sunday and we just host a party, and we have some fantastic bakers and cooks and grill masters, and obviously a wonderful brew team that produces great beer. So that's at your disposal. We do a Christmas party. We usually do it in January or February, and we do our gift exchange. The 6-pack.
I remember. I got in trouble.
Yeah, you're infamous.
Well, it was taking a long time.
It was.
I'm like, man, this thing, I'm like, and I didn't really want to leave because somebody could be like, hey, I want to take that. And so I'm like, well, I'm just going to go ahead and take. And like, I think Sue was like sitting 1 or 2 chairs down. She's like, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm just drinking. She's like, oh, and then like, it just became this thing. And I'm like, okay, well now I'll have to like change this one beer off.
We have certain instances that happen throughout the year that we'll refer to, like right now we have the Tiny S's like conundrum, where we went back and it's a great sour beer from Prairie that tastes like Skittles. And I went back and looked at our reports, and we sold half the keg, but the keg kicked. So where did all that beer go? And it's because it's so good. We would sample it. We would have it as a shift beer. So I call it the Tiny S's problem. You're the Schleifler conundrum. All right. So don't pull a Schleif. Don't open. So you are forever immortalized.
Solid. And even if it's a small community, it's a very high quality community. So I'm good with that. So a couple of things, and I want to hit the rewards after this, because you guys have, there's medals all over the wall now, but 2020 hit, right, and a lot of businesses, and this is one of the pivotal questions I like to ask because it has pivot in the name, but how did y'all survive through COVID and pivot to do that? And because I think part of this could be the canning story as well, right, outside the growlers. But can you just tell me a little bit about that?
I think we always did growlers, glass growlers beforehand, and they it's great. We'll sell them. They're a very inefficient way to fill beer. It just can foam, and you got to seal it and label it. And crowlers or a 32-ounce can. And I think a month before, it was either, I don't know who. Probably Tim's idea was like, we need a crowler machine, and everybody did the research, and we bought a really nice crowler machine a month before. So I think it was February, and that seals a can and creates a to-go beer that's sold at a little bit of a discount because you're taking it home. You can't open it on site. We also had the canning line the year previous, so we could start canning stuff in 16-ounce cans and distribute that and get our beer out there. And then we had an online store, very simple for merchandise, not for beer, for merchandise through Square. When we were shut down, we were thinking about, I remember we were going to do the Mardi Gras. It was me, Sue, and Brian, and we're like, do we do this? Because COVID was kind of coming through. We didn't want to have mass groups of people, but we still want to do this pub crawl. We've got some kickback real quick about doing a pub crawl when COVID is, they hadn't shut everything down yet, but COVID was rampant. And we're like, fine, we'll stop it. And then the governor shut everything down. And overnight, I think we got together. It was either in the brewery, and we turned our online merch store into an online beer store. And we got that out through social media because the only place you could get beer was at a grocery store. At this point, all restaurants, all bars were closed. Mm-hmm. We were not a restaurant, so we were just a tap room, but we had the ability to can. And we have a beautiful parking lot that can make a big U, and we have mobile tablets. So we just said, all right, we're going to sell beer to go. And we just pushed that through social media, took all the necessary precautions. The tap room just became a hub for canning. And I think in the first 3 months, we sold like 2,000 or 3,000 crowlers. We would just fill them. Right now, you fill them to order. Mm-hmm. We were filling 50 dank crowlers just to go. Right. Then we had the canning line working. We had everything, and we were just to go. And I think Tim said we did 80% of our sales that we would normally do. First month and a half, it was great because we were just turn and burn. It was fun, listening to music. Everybody had their mask on, took the precaution that we needed to take. But then we had to up the hourly for employees because to make it worth their while, they're tipped employees. So we had to do that. We cut back on employees, on ones who weren't, and they understood that. Everybody understood, hey, if I have another job, this person doesn't, they can take it. It's very family oriented, circle the wagons type of place. And after about 3 months, it's like, man, this is just getting like, I miss talking to people. The employees are, missing out on tips. You had the ability to tip online, but it was a weird concept to tip on a retail order.
Yeah.
Like that. It still kept working. And then we applied, the DBPR met and loosened the restrictions on having a restaurant license. Tim, Brian, and Sue went out to Pensacola and met, I forget the guy's name at this point, and they had a meeting with all places like us to see what we could do. So we got a hot dog steamer with buns, got a restaurant license, did some hot dogs. We could sell, one hot dog. It didn't matter. It's just we had the license.
Right.
So we could open back up with restricted seating. The good thing is 90% of our seating is outside.
Right.
So they could social distance easily.
Right.
Then I believe we got shut down again. And that one was rough because restaurants were open. But we still, I'm trying to remember if we had a restaurant. I think we had our restaurant license. We had to be open, but people still weren't coming out, even though we were open. But we hired the people back, brought them back, and people were getting it just wasn't the same. Right. That one hurt a little bit more. Mm-hmm. And then fortunately we were able to open up again. Yeah. And just it took off. But that helped the process for us. How to do an online store, how to can properly, logistics of planning. It was helpful.
Yeah, a lot of people were forced into that, right? They had to think of that, or unfortunately they didn't end up making it, right? Yeah. So they had to pivot in some instance. And I think some of those lessons learned ended up being some things that have sustained in businesses, just like you said, right? That
it changed. Oh, it absolutely changed the way people do business.
Yeah, for sure. So post COVID, so now like you've gone through all this, right? Again, what do we say? 8 years? My math's terrible. 8 years, been open. So now like I'm seeing all these things on social media. And then when you walk in, you have, how do you know off the top of your head how many you have?
I think 10.
10 medals. Yeah. From different
and this
beer competitions.
And I preface with this, all this credit that I'm going to speak to are the brew team, past and present. We have some people that left that brewed some beer, and but Brian Detweiler, Robert Weidenberner, Adrian is the new guy on the crew, but Greg Dedeke was there, Rachel Brighty, all these guys that helped brew this beer. And we won some, in the beginning, some best in Florida, which we won 3 golds and a silver, 1 runner-up in best largest brewery. And it's depending on the barrel size, how much you produce, that you... we look small, but we're actually a large brewery in comparison to some other breweries.
What year was it? The 17th fastest growing, right?
Yeah. And it's interesting because we went from brewing 16 barrels a month to brewing 250 barrels a month. So that's a bigger jump than a brewery brewing 25,000 to 30,000, right? We were 17th fastest growing craft brewery in the country. Yeah. Which is great.
Was it 19?
What's that?
Remember what year it was?
Oh, yeah, I think 19. It was like the first year because, we haven't been on that list since because our numbers are they increase small, unlike the other years. And they won best in Florida for Honey Saison, which was No Wall Farmhouse. They won gold for Cosmic Origin, which is a bottle.
Sorry.
For barrel aged stout. Yep. That one for like barrel aged strong beer. They won gold for Origins of Life, which is a barley wine, barrel aged barley wine, and silver for the Boggy Bayou Stout. So those are the first 4. That was like the first year. Boom, everything came to. Then they did a lager competition, Best of Florida. We won. I forget if I think it's silver for Pro Sprout, which will be coming out soon.
Like me some Pro Sprout. Easy drinking.
Yeah,
especially towards the cooler time frame. Getting into that Oktoberfest mindset. That's pretty good.
Emulator.
Whoa, I thought we were going to touch that at the end there.
No, Emulator won silver or bronze for Doppelbock. Best of Florida.
Oh, okay, Best of Florida. Got it.
And then recently, and there's a couple other bronze and silvers in there. Yeah. But the big one was Emulator won gold at World Beer Cup.
Yes.
So in beer world, the way Brian explained it to me is like that's the Oscars and the Emmys.
Yes.
There are 10,000 entries for 153 categories. There were 107 different Doppelbocks. It's a dark German lager. And he came to me like a week before they were saying the results. He's like, World Beer Cup is following Third Planet. He's like, I don't want to get ahead of myself. He's like, but that's weird. They only follow 200 people. Why did they follow Third Planet?
Wow.
He's like, I'm just not going to get excited. And they live streamed it, and my wife and I were watching. And it's funny because I had my phone out ready to film the placing, and then Kimberly had her phone out. I'm like, oh, she's filming, so I'm not going to film. And they say third place, and they say second place, which was like Eradicator. And I was like, oh, that was so close. At least we tried. And then first place was Emulator. We both stood up and started screaming. Like, oh my God, it's World Beer Cup, and you get 8 seconds of glory, and then they just go to the next one.
Right. Take advantage.
And I look, I'm like, did you get that? And she's like, no, I thought you were filming. I'm like, oh, no. And I call Brian. I'm like, Brian, are you watching this? He's like, no. He's like, I'm out to eat. I'm like, you won gold.
Oh, man.
And you could tell he was trying to temper himself because he was out like in a restaurant and his friends. But that's a big deal.
Flip the table, like jump up.
And he might cringe when I say this, but you can technically say that's the best Doppelbock in the world right now.
Wow.
I mean, there's beers that maybe not be entered, but hey.
Yeah,
we got the gold. It's in our tap room, and they can't take it back.
It's no takesy backsies. Yep.
So the thing is, that was from November, so we didn't have it brewed. It's a lager. It takes a little while.
Yeah.
So it drops today, actually.
Oh my God, I know. I'm so excited.
Yeah,
I may or may not be visiting.
Yeah,
again, but
yeah, absolutely. So we bottled, I think 250 bottles. It's a 2-bottle max, and we'll see how that goes. But it's got gold.
See, I'm just waiting until my kids are older, so then I can do 2 per kid. And
yeah,
by that time, it's practically close to 250.
Your
bottles.
money is still green, so I don't care.
Or it's a card, right?
Yeah.
So we're getting closer to the end here, and I sort of want to wrap some stuff up. One of the questions I like to ask is, and I think you've defined a lot of this just from your experience, but and it's hard to single this out. But did you ever have a conversation in your life? Because again, hard to single it out, but that, from a personal standpoint, this one conversation that you sort of, built a lot of that foundational moral and stuff you have. Do you have anything that you go back to in your mind that and it just jumps to the forefront?
Yeah, I think there's something that gives me peace. It's very interesting. And I really want to give, credit. I don't know who told me this. And somebody said, some people with their lives, they build skyscrapers. They focus, and I probably have said this to you before. They build skyscrapers, and that's amazing. They're focused, they're driven on the one thing, and they build this big, tall, beautiful career, personal life, whatever it is. And then other people build jigsaw puzzles, and that it resonates with me because I have scattered interests, and you don't know what that piece will influence or show up, and where it will be in the whole puzzle of your life, as corny as that sounds. But you start to see this picture emerge, and that's okay too.
Right.
I think we have a tendency to try and build up skills that we're like mediocre at, even though we have skills that we're really good at. Mm-hmm. And focusing on those, yes, work on some things, make yourself proficient. But if you're really good at something, find the best way to express it and the best way to use it for your benefit, for your family's benefit, and for the people around you's benefit. I can connect with people. I can adapt to situations. I feel like I deal with stress. I'm not an organized person. I'm not a detail-oriented person. We have people at the brewery that are obsessed with spreadsheets and love that. And I'm great. Like, do that. If you're on our team, we're working together. I think Richard Branson said, find the people who do what you do, but do it better and hire them.
Absolutely.
It sounds kind of lazy to say it, but I think when you have that group mentality like we have at Third Planet, everybody's playing their roles. It's okay that I'm not the most detail-oriented person, not because I think that so-and-so is going to pick up the slack, but because they may not be good in the area that I'm good at, and we're relying on each other. It's symbiotic.
There's a couple of people, like Barry Drake is one of the things I can think, or people I can think of, but they're very much like the jack of all trades, master of none, but oftentimes better than a master of one.
Oh,
right. That's by the way, there's a second verse.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. It's one of those things. Cause I live that life, a very, very similar life to that. Right. So, and I would almost say I was taking a class and there was a big T, and they said a lot of leaders, are representative of this big T, and the T is, so again, a letter T, not the drink T, letter T. And you have 2 or 3 things you're really good at. And that's that basis, that stem that forms a T. And then you have a myriad of other things that form that top of the T that you're mediocre at or whatever.
Yeah.
And like that forms a really good leader and a successful person. Mm-hmm. And it's very much along those same lines. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't be successful skyscraper.
Yeah.
It just means that there's more of an array that enables you to be successful when you have more of that T.
And I just think it's when you're defining success that it's
boy, that's a whole other.
Yeah. But that's what
I had a whole, so when I used to do my professional development, And I used to literally, I had a slide. How do you define success? Because some of it's monetary, some of it's family. So I mean, there's a whole spiel about that. But I guess what I mean by that is to fit the, like, don't like kick yourself, if you're not just, hey, I'm 100% at one. And even John Maxwell talks about that, which there's some not controversy. There's some conflicting information about if I'm 60% at this thing, and 30 or whatever at these other things, that 60% thing, it will be more valuable to myself in the business if I get that 60% up to 100 compared to those trying to get those other 30% up to 40%. Yeah. Right. And so that's sort of along the same lines as like, I feel like I'm really good at one or two of these other things. It doesn't mean I'm going to stop doing these other, 100%. And that's the problem is I think people go, nope, I just need to quit those. And maybe those 30 or 40% things are passion items or humbling or whatever. And that's how they they de-stress or whatever else. Home brewery, for instance, right? I'm not fantastic. I'm not
you can make alcohol.
Right. You can make alcohol and I'm not great, but I love doing that. That doesn't mean like, oh, I'm quitting my job and I'm just going to, be a full-time brewer forever. Get better, right. And then you go home. Then you're walking across the streets. Anyways. So that's great. And I think that, so I usually ask from a personal professional standpoint, do you have anything along those lines from a professional standpoint, or would you say that sort of ties in?
I feel like that ties in. And I was trying to go back and think about the professional conversations. Just the people that, it's not so much a conversation, but the mentality, it's the actions speak louder than words. Watching, the McCools interact with their community and bringing Brian and myself into the fold, and watching my father stay late when somebody showed up right before they closed and stayed at half an hour with them, even though it means that, I got a half an hour late. He knew that spending time with those people is going to benefit the business. There go, benefit the family.
100%.
So it's, just, I guess that, that would really be it. It's just noticing and taking stock and being grateful through the people that I've come to know in this business.
So I have like two more questions here. So what would you say that you value most in life right now?
My son and my wife.
Family.
100%.
Straight up.
I held one baby before my son. I did not like babies. As soon as he was born, I was like, this is the reason I'm here. 100%. No doubt in my mind.
Wow.
Yeah. I never changed a diaper. And they're like, oh, you need to, and I'm like, I got it. It's to see the leaps and bounds. And when I go home, he's probably said 4 words that I've never heard him say before. Yesterday or 2 days ago, Kimberly brought him into the tap room. We're family friendly, by the way, so it's not some weird, child running across the bar. And she brought him in and he saw me and he ran across the tap room and gave me a huge hug. And I'm like, I don't care how crappy of a day I've had or who's yelled at me or if I disappointed some, that makes up for it.
Yep. For sure. No,
and they are, I'm not a huge fan of confrontation. I don't shy away from it, but if somebody, and I use the word threaten, not in a violent way, but threatens the business that we're a part of in our livelihood, outside alcohol, being inappropriate at work. And it could be uncomfortable to approach them to correct their behavior. I just think of Kimberly and Kairos. Boom, that nervousness goes away. This is for them to keep this place going, to keep this place thriving, to keep this place family friendly, to have a good reputation, because it's not just my reputation, it's their reputation too.
All right. That's great. Yeah. Oh man, that hits home, as you can tell, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Times X amount.
Yeah.
So okay. I think we've got to the point now. It's the final question, the special question. And it's so funny because you didn't get to.
I know. I was like, before I was like, I got to look at this. Nope. With the special. Are they different? Are they the same?
They're the same.
Oh, crap.
And it's because, if people listen to it, that's fine. They have more time to think about it. But, maybe I'll switch it up just to surprise people. But one of the questions I thought about, because it's a unique factor, and I'm going to ask you, and it's now knowing your story, it'll be interesting. But how many beds have you slept in your life?
Oh, wow. I mean, what defines a bed? This is like in a room, in a bed? Like this? Okay. Well, because my trip, I slept at 40 different people's houses. So there's 40 right there. I'm going to say 100.
So it's interesting. So when I've asked this question to other people, so I asked my cousin, right, who's the music producer. Yeah. His first initial thought was like, wait, by myself? Like, right? Like, you know, so the funny thing. Yeah. And then Jim was very much like, holy crud. Like, he's like, I can't think. He's like, when I was overseas and I backpatted this, he was in the military, he's moved, and he's like, I don't know, you know, and so it's interesting because it's not really, the answer is not really the numeric value. Yeah. It's the journey your mind goes on when you start answering that question. So luckily, you know, we're fortunate with our conversation that those triggered early on, right? You start talking about the walk. Yeah. And so we went through your history, but a lot of people, you have to start going back and you go, okay, well, when I was a kid, I went over and had some sleepovers, and then I'd go on like maybe a high school trip or a college trip. And then like you just start, like you go
way more.
I guarantee it's over 100, Fran.
I know. And I'm like,
I guarantee.
I'm like, oh wait, no, I did travel.
Yes.
Yeah. So I did have sleepovers.
And it just becomes astronomical. But it's neat because out of all the questions you can ask somebody, it's a really neat thing to watch somebody's mind start going through that journey. Yeah. Because it just hits all these trigger points. And then sometimes it's really interesting because people start thinking about it and they'll stop because they'll like, oh man, I remember sleeping there. And then they go down the path of like, when I was there and blah, blah, blah. And so they sort of forget the rest of like, but it's cool to see that. And like I said, I think we were fortunate enough to have the conversation. A lot of that was triggered during,
I was like, does a bathroom on the floor of a restaurant count? Like, these numbers are going to way up real quick.
I'm so interested to see how many people are going to beat that one with the sleep on the floor. But that's, So I guess, you know, the biggest thing before we close it, which first off, I'll thank you. Thank you very much. And
this is awesome.
Thank you for talking about Third Planet as well. Do you have anything else you wanted to sort of add at the end here?
No, I relish in the opportunity to speak about these things all at once. Usually something will come up and I get to kind of go back and think about something in a small facet or one situation. I never really get to put it all together and see it as a timeline, which is really interesting because I think I need to do that. I think I need to go back, look at pictures, start developing a timeline because there's a lot more there. And I think a lot more that I could probably draw from than I remember. I'm very used to just living right now. I'm like, oh yeah, I did that. Yeah. And you know, where was I going before that event? And so no, I thank you for the opportunity to do this.
Right. And don't forget, so it's not a selfish thing, right? So people can learn, right? The whole thing, people add value experiences is you add value to others, even though you may not know it. And it doesn't have to mean that it's self-fulfilling. It's just something that happens by the nature of telling your story. Yeah. Right. That's the whole point of it.
Yeah. No, it's great. And it just, drives me to make sure I jot things down so my son can, know the life his father lived.
Awesome.
Before he was here.
Well, hopefully
this will be good.
Well, thanks, Fran, for coming on People Add Value Experience.
Thank you.
Until next time.
Cheers.